Hey guys, welcome back. So one very important part of user authorization is knowing what role this user is in. Up until now, we haven't done anything associated with roles. We're more preoccupied with getting the user information, validating it, and whether we create the user or not. Now, when it comes to roles, the roles that are allowed need to exist in the system prior to the system being used. So the same way that we would have set up these seeding operations for hotels and countries, they're of less importance really than roles would be. So we want to make sure that the roles are there from the get-go so that when the users start registering, the roles are already there. So what we want to do is seed them. But instead of seeding them the way that we seeded country and hotel, I'm going to show you a way that we can abstract that operation from our DB context and keep the DB context as light as possible. Similar to how I would have shown you to do that with our services that we are installing. So what I'm going to do is set up a new folder. I have configurations already. I'm just going to go ahead and add another folder inside that, and I'm going to call it entities. So configurations for anything that is entity related. And then I'm going to add a class, and then I'm going to call this class role configuration. Go ahead and add it. And then this role configuration class is inheriting from entity type configuration, and it will be of the type identity role. All right, go ahead and include any missing references. So we're just letting role configuration know that it's going to be associated with that configuration type. And of course, we have to go ahead and implement whatever this is saying needs to be implemented, which is our configure function. All right, so it's automatically going to pass over the same builder that is in use on model creating. So then we can actually replicate the code that we have where we say builder dot has data, and then inside of builder dot has data we can go ahead and create new roles, new role objects. So let me just sort out these quotation marks. All right, so new identity role, and we're just going to initialize this object. I'm not going to give it an ID. It will sort out its own ID, but the name, let's call this one user, and we have to give it a normalized name, which is really just a capitalized version of that, of the name really. And then I'm also going to give it administrator. Let's spell out administrator. And then the normalized is all caps version of administrator. Administrate. So always make sure the spelling is right. I've spent days debugging bad spelling, so don't be like me. All right. So now that we have this configure method and as many rows as you think you may need, you can go ahead and configure them. But the most important part of all of that is when we're ready to put it into the system, we need only say builder dot apply, builder dot apply configuration. And then I'm just going to say new role configuration. And then include the missing reference to our newly created. And there we go. So you see, that looks much neater than having all of this in this file. Remember that the reason we moved it from at the top here above the list was that it was so huge a function because of all these lines. So if you want, you can pause right now and attempt to build other configuration files for country and hotel. All right, so I hope you actually attempted it because I did it. All right, so I'm not going to ask you to do anything I'm not going to do. So just in case you need some guidance, I went ahead and created configuration files per type. All right, so we have hotel and we have country and we have roles. So we created role together. I did country, same naming. Basically, you could copy and paste the code and just change the essential parts. Country configuration, its entity type configuration relative to country as a context class, and then the same code that was there to create the countries, I just cut and paste. All right. The only thing is that in the previous one, we had builder dot entity, something like that. And I removed that dot entity part. So it's just builder dot has data. So you can go ahead and replicate that across both country and hotel. And if you're doing your own thing across any other one, and now your on model building looks much cleaner. All right. And I think I'll just put this one. I don't really think it matters where in terms of the order, but I'll just put it at the bottom since that's the order in which everything was being created anyway. So country, then hotel, then we have the roles. Once again, these two are really optional in terms of what's really needed to get the application up and running. All right. So now that we have the role configuration or seeding, we can now just add migration and say added default roles, and let that do it. And the resulting migration file has 2 entries into our roles file. So you see it generated its own ID. That's why I didn't bother to modify that. But then we get user and we get administrator. So when we do update database, it will go ahead and do the insert. So once that is done, we have 2 other changes to make. So one is in the user detail. I've introduced this collection of type string and I'm calling it roles, right? So we're giving the user the opportunity to say which role or roles should this person have, right? And then in the account controller, right after we have vetted if the registration attempt was successful or not, or the user creation operation was successful or not. Remember, if it gets beyond that if statement, it means that it was successful. Then we take the extra step of saying user manager dot add roles async, and we're adding to the user that was just created the role that came in, or roles that came in. So if you look at this, it has a few overrides. One override allows it to, or not override, overload, sorry. So the one overload allows you to just pass in a list of roles that it will just go ahead and add to this user. So once a role exists, then it will be associated with the user in the backend. Once again, built-in function, not much code or effort needed on our part. So let us take this for a spin. So in Swagger, you'll see that they're modifying the potential values, right? So they're showing you that you can pass in an array called roles. So the array is the square bracket, whereas an object is the curly brace, right? So let's try it out. And I'm going to leave the same user. That's the same user that we got success with last time, right? So that means I should get some validation message to say it shouldn't work, but I'm going to pass in the role of user. I'm going to execute, and then here's what I'm getting. So the result is that I have a 400 bad request, duplicate email is the issue, it's already taken. So that validation is working. So let's say user at hotellisting.com, just something different, and that's the user. So I'll go ahead and execute. And what I'm getting is not a bad response. All right, that looks good. So let us see what happened in the database after those operations. So I'm going to kill the execution, go over to the server manager. And firstly, I'm going to look in the users table. So I should have at least 2 users based on my tests so far. And there we go. We have user at hotel listing and user at example. All right, so that's good. The next one would be the roles. So I just scaffolded the roles myself. I just seeded the roles in. So these are the roles that we created. However, the user role association is stored here because it's a many to many. So they're saying that many users might have many roles, right? So that's why we allowed an array, because maybe one user might be administrator and user, maybe and supervisor, etc., etc. Based on your system, it's all context, right? However, in this table, when we view data, then we should see the user ID associated with the role ID. All right, so if we were to just go back and double check, you see that this is the user ID. There we go, ending 8F7. So if I look at that, same user ID, ending 8F7, and the role 755. So you have to go over to this one to see which one is 755, which is user. So that is how we start integrating roles-based authorization into our system. So now our users, when they get registered, will get registered with their appropriate roles.